Welcome to The Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hello, I'm Bela.and.mike, coming to you from upstate New York. I am a former three-time entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and business school professor.
And I'm Mike Wasserman, professor of international management at the Münster University of Applied Sciences in Münster, Germany. Thanks for joining us today. When Bela and I were both on the faculty of Clarkson University, we'd have lots of interesting conversations about how two of our favorite topics, innovation and entrepreneurship, have been constantly evolving. We do this over coffee or lunch as time allowed. But about 2 years ago, I moved to Germany, and shortly thereafter, Bela retired. Bela had the idea to continue these conversations in the form of a podcast. I was highly skeptical at first, but we've now done over 70 episodes, and we've had a blast, haven't we, Bela?
We sure have, Mike. And we invite our listeners to join us each week as we talk with interesting entrepreneurs to share their stories and ideas. Our goal is to bring you individuals who have taken the unconventional path to find happiness in life and at work. One of the key elements of this podcast is to interview business founders we can all identify with. Our guests have included coffee roasters, software developers, business consultants, and restaurant owners. We want their stories to inspire you to say, hey, I can do that, and then, just maybe, give you a push to start your own entrepreneurial adventure.
Before we begin, we'd like to share with you that our podcast is brought to you in part by the law firm of Phillips Lytle, LLP. This is a sponsorship that makes a lot of sense to us. Bela, you know them well, don't you?
I sure do. I have worked with the key entrepreneurship practice partners at Phillips Lytle for over 20 years. Their nationally recognized attorneys take an entrepreneurial approach to legal matters, and they have a long history of success with startup businesses. Phillips Lytle is my go-to team for guiding business startups down the path to success, and we thank them for their continued support of the Unconventional Path podcast. And next up, today's guest is Tom Rosecrans, founder of RockSport. Hello, listeners. Bela here. And today I'm here with Tom Rosecrans. He has an interesting background, and he founded a business called RockSport. So welcome to the show, Tom.
Thanks, Bela.
So could you explain to our listeners what RockSport is?
RockSport is an indoor rock climbing gym, and it's a relatively new enterprise here in the United States. The first commercial climbing gym started in 1987 on the West Coast. And since then, it's grown to the point where there are over 500 of these indoor climbing gyms all over the United States. Every large city has them, even New Orleans and Orlando, Florida, and Melbourne, Florida. You know, even flatland places, middle of Kansas, there's climbing gyms now. Some of them have been creatively put into grain silos or other unused large buildings. Since that's happened, a lot of those unused buildings have kind of disappeared off of the market, and so people are building more purpose-built climbing gyms. And this is our third climbing gym, and I'm informed by my wife that it's going to be my last. So that RockSport, indoor rock climbing, and we do some other fitness-oriented activities like yoga. So that kind of coincides with, we call climbing vertical yoga anyway, so it kind of fits hand in glove.
Okay. So for people who may not be familiar with a climbing gym is, what do people do in a climbing gym?
We try to replicate what's outside, but in a safer, more controlled environment. So basically there are these blobs of plastic that are bolted to the wall that can be changed on a regular basis, and we make paths for challenging people to get from the bottom to the top without falling off. And you're harnessed in and you're roped in so that the consequences are minimal if you've followed all the directions all the way along.
So if I want to go climb some rock face in Yosemite, I can come to one of these indoor gyms and sort of get some basic skills, et cetera, to help prepare me for something like that.
Yes, going to Yosemite is kind of quite a few steps up, but you get your start in a gym. I saw a talk by Tommy Caldwell, who climbed one of the more difficult routes recently called the Dawn Wall. And the name of his show was Start Small but Dream Big, and it was his story of starting on the side of his barn as a very young man and eventually climbing the hardest route on El Cap over the period of years. And he replicated various parts of that climb on the side of his barn and practiced it so that when he was 1,000 feet off of the ground, he could launch himself at that and be successful.
Yeah. So what type of people come to a climbing gym like this?
Oh gosh, it's almost like a bar. We have the full range.
So you have your regulars.
Yeah, well, you have the young hip crowd. It's kind of a young hip enterprise, so people get drawn to that. But we have older folk. I turned 70 this coming year, so I'm still throwing myself at it in a declining way, but still pretty good, I guess. We have moms, we have kids, we have grandparents. We have grandparents bringing kids. You got the full gamut.
And you do programs for them, like sort of structured programs for folks?
Yes, we have climbing teams from every age, from 5 to 18, and then they kind of disappear during college. The locals disappear for college, but they come back on the vacations and they take their skills that they learn here and they take them to college, or they take them to other places in the United States or Europe.
So when you say teams, is this a competitive sport that one can be in?
Yes, it is. Our team, we give them the option. They can either choose to compete or not, and they would compete in the northeastern region of the United States. And now that it's an Olympic sport, it's become very, very programmed in terms of the steps you need to take to advance to like the United States Olympic team, just like any other sport like gymnastics or anything else.
Okay, so it sounds like this has been a sport that's been growing, like you said. It started on the West Coast, like many of these types of things do. And so how long have you been in this sort of indoor climbing enterprise?
I started in 1992. And I went on an expedition to the Himalayas, and two of the guys who were on that expedition owned a gym that they just started up in Glens Falls behind the Inside Edge. And it was an old Quonset hut. It was only about maybe 30 feet tall at the tallest in the middle. But they started this gym, and I got involved with that in terms of, I became a member, and I said, man, they beat me to this. This would be something I'd like to do. Well, on this expedition, one guy said, I'm going to give you my shares because I'm not interested in this anymore. And when we came back from the Himalayas, we found out that the gym was running without insurance. There was a bunch of weird things that were going on.
So when he said he's giving you his shares, he was basically transferring his liabilities to you.
He was, yes. I didn't know that till we poked under all the rocks when we got back. Long story short, in December of 1992, I took over ownership of the gym. And from then until now, we've gone from that facility to a handmade facility at the sports page in an old barn that I drove every screw and put every bolt in. And we outgrew that place. I don't know if you remember that place.
I do, yeah. That's where I first started to climb.
It was very small. It had 14 rope stations. You could climb across the roof. You could even belay off the toilet because we had the outside wall of the john with holds and climbing. Yeah. So it was kind of an amazing place. And it created a community that just continued to grow. And that I saw the opportunity to say, hey, maybe we should take the next step.
So in that ill-fated, I shouldn't say ill-fated, in that wonderful trip to the Himalayas, did you just have like inspiration to say, I'd like to do this business? Or sort of what sort of drove you to say, I want to do that?
There was no driving force, so it kind of came out of the blue with, I would have loved to have done it ahead of those guys. But I was teaching, I had a young family, so it wasn't in the cards. But I didn't think I was ever going to go to the Himalayas either, and all of a sudden that got thrown in my lap, and then all of a sudden, the climbing gym pretty much got thrown in my lap as well. And I ran it part-time as, teaching during the day and running that at night.
Yeah, so this is sort of what nowadays is often called a side hustle, right? So that's how it started, at least.
Yeah.
So you were a high school teacher?
High school teacher at Queensbury.
And that was your full-time job?
That was my full-time gig. And
Yeah.
then, I guess you could call it a hobby. We tried running it with volunteer staff, and that was a miserable experience. And not having any business background, there was kind of a lot of trial by error and more error than
Yes.
and trials.
And so you must be an avid climber if you went climbing in the Himalayas.
Yeah, it kind of defines my life in many ways, and there's some good and bad to that, certainly. But I've kind of dialed it into the point where my wife and I, when we travel now, we spend half a day climbing at a cliff, and it has to have some sort of scenic good points to it, and then in the afternoon we go someplace else that she wants to go to an art gallery. So we travel all over Europe. We've been to Asia, and we can find climbing everywhere, either indoors or out. And we climb, and we find all the other things that we love to do.
Is it an expensive sport to get involved in?
I like to compare it to skiing. So if you look at the cost, and I'm not going to get into snowboarding, but I'm going to talk skiing. But you look at a pair of skis and a pair of boots and a pair of bindings, you got a pretty sizable investment. For the price of your ski boots, you can buy everything you possibly could need for climbing indoors and for a lot of the outdoor activities as well. And if you're climbing, you can climb 365 days a year, whereas skiing, you got maybe 3 months or 4 months, unless you go to the southern hemisphere. You can ski in the off season. So it's relatively inexpensive when I look at some of the other sports.
Yeah. So that's good news, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For folks. And so when people come to the RockSport here to climb for a day, how much does that cost? I mean, lift tickets for a ski area, if we use that analogy, like over $100.
You go to Killington, I think it's $130 or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
And then that's for 8 hours if you can ski for 8 hours. It costs $17 for a day pass here. If you have your own gear, it costs you a little less than $25 if you need to rent a harness and shoes. And there's three different climbing activities you can do here. There's the bouldering, where you only need a pair of shoes and you don't wear a harness, and you climb low, really hard things close to the ground. And those really hard routes close to the ground are puzzles. They're physical and mental puzzles that you have to kind of work through. And that's kind of the new up and coming. It's kind of like snowboarding and skiing. You'll hear me refer back to skiing a lot in this. And that's kind of the new hip thing, because it's very social. So you'll see that pile of kids sitting over there in the bouldering area, and each guy or girl will throw themselves at their problems, and they'll talk it through and how to solve the problems. And then there's rope climbing, top rope climbing, where the rope goes to the top of the wall and then back down, so that if you fall off, there's no real consequences. And then there's lead climbing, which is kind of like what you do outside, where the rope and both climbers start on the ground, and you trail the rope up, clipping into protection as you climb up.
Mm-hmm. So you have all three of those activities you can do here. Now, $15 or $17 a day sounds really reasonable to me. And if I put my businessman hat on, I'd say you're not charging enough. So what sort of rationale do you think about to sort of come up with pricing? Because I think pricing is always one of the interesting topics in any business, right? How do you price your product or your service?
Right. Isn't the business adage, charge as much as you can with a straight face and practice your straight face, or something?
Something like that, yeah. Go to actors school to practice your straight face.
There's a couple things. We do have competition. Not other climbing gyms, but other activities. And I think in the United States, at least in the backwaters, and I consider the Adirondacks a little bit of a backwater, there's a feeling that climbing is kind of the lunatic fringe. It's a dangerous thing that, parents don't want their kids getting involved with. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I remember when skiing was a dangerous activity, and only crazy guys skied, and professional athletes had no skiing clauses written into their contracts because, the equipment wasn't that good, broken legs were common, and somewhere along the line, the light switched on in the ski areas, and they said, why don't we attract families? And, so the equipment got better, releasable bindings got really good, and all of a sudden it wasn't such a dangerous thing, and it became a family activity. And, if you go to Europe today, climbing is an accepted activity for all families.
Yeah. And I see you guys doing that here because I've been here on Saturdays or Sundays, and there's birthday parties here, right? So clearly you got 7, 8, 10, 15-year-old kids coming in here, or if they're younger, like my granddaughters climb.
Yeah. Right? And, we never thought, 5 to 7-year-olds are going to be too afraid, they're going to be too... And then we started a program called Pebble Crushers, and we found that they were rocking it.
Right. It's their parents that are afraid.
Right. And part of it's, you think that there's no fear in them, but they do have quite a bit of fear, and a lot of them, it's a long process for them to eventually make it to the top of the wall. But that journey is one of self-discovery, and it's an interesting one.
Yeah. So, is there a indoor rock climbing owners association?
There's a climbing wall association, and it came about because for insurance reasons. We were kind of lumped in with amusement parks. And in case you don't know this, amusement parks are very dangerous places. And our insurance premiums were high, and we couldn't understand why this was the case because we take, we go to great lengths to make sure things are safe, although safe is a 4-letter word in the climbing community. We make it as safe as we possibly can. So we formed an association, and we got the insurance companies behind us to understand what we do and how we do it. Our application process is very long. We have to detail how we teach things and all of that so that they feel at ease with how we do things. And our insurance rate went way down, and then this has just kind of snowballed into now every year they have a conference where we talk about new ideas and new things. And
so there is sort of a place for folks who are in this industry to kind of get together occasionally and sort of share ideas, work together, solve problems.
We like to drink beer together.
And climb together,
and climb. And, it's held out on the Front Range in Colorado in a great place. And, people from around the world come to this conference. People who are starting out their climbing wall experience industry, and they find out what the new ideas are and where to go.
Do you find most of the owners are also avid climbers? Do those things kind of go together?
That I can't say. I know a lot of them are.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends from the Northeast that I know, gym owners from the Northeast, are.
Because it's interesting. The ski industry used to be that way, right? In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, most of the folks who owned ski areas were also very avid skiers, and that's really changed now. Now there's big corporations that own a lot of them, et cetera. So it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out.
Same thing is happening in the climbing wall. There's, the franchises and groups of climbing gyms are banding together, and they're forming big conglomerates. And
so it is going on.
It
right?
is going on,
yeah.
And it's business driven, not love of climbing.
Yes. Well, that's certainly not unusual for as industries mature, as business areas mature. Other people start seeing opportunity there, and rolling things up, consolidating them. I mean, we've seen that happen in lots of industries, the ski industry for sure. Yeah. So what do you think the future is for this industry?
Well, that was a conversation I had last summer. 2 summers ago, I went to Finland. I talked with a guy who owns a bunch of gyms in Finland. And my stepson was getting married to a Finnish girl. We were there for a wedding, and I kind of made it a business trip too. So I hooked up with this guy, and we talked at length about where it's going. And here I have this brand new building, 10,000 square feet, state-of-the-art climbing wall, and we're still one of the smallest gyms in the United States, if not the world. I mean, we're tiny. If you're talking about a climbing gym and not just a bouldering gym, we're tiny. There are over 50 to 60,000 square foot building climbing gyms. They just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And some of them you can take a virtual tour, and it's like a rabbit warren where you got corridors of bouldering things, and you wind your way through the building. And it's incredibly fun looking.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. So do you think the trend will be bigger, bigger, bigger?
It's just like the ski areas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they build more and more and more and do more.
Now, if someone wanted to get into this business today, I mean, you said the first one you built back in the old barn, you built the wall yourself, et cetera. And so if I wanted to get into the gym, rock climbing gym business, is there someone I can go to say, hey, design me a rock climbing gym?
Yes, and any one of the wall building companies in the world will take you step by step through the whole process. Me having been in business for quite a while, when I contacted these guys, which was at that conference in Colorado, I said, I have a building plan. I want you guys to show me what you can do for me. And
so you had a shell of a building.
I had a shell of a building that I designed, and I knew that I wanted a yoga space, and I knew I wanted a cafe, and I wanted fitness, and I wanted a classroom. So I took this shell in SketchUp, and I took it with me there. The guy downloaded it into his laptop, and he said, "Okay, let's start over here at the door, and I'll design you a building. If you think you like it, then we'll talk price, and et cetera, et cetera."
Right. So much easier to do that today than it was when you were starting.
Yeah, it's one thing with your protractor and your graph paper, and it's another thing when the guy can plop it into his computer.
Yeah.
And it took an hour and 15 minutes to decide to make this building. And I had my daughter and son-in-law on the phone with me, and FaceTiming, and we went through the whole building, and we got done, and nothing changed from that moment until these guys showed up and started putting it together.
Wow. Now, did you have any business background?
No business background, none. And that was kind of interesting, and learning things the hard way. But it was easier with a small gym with very low overhead. I was leasing the premises. Everything was taken care of. Minimal headaches. Opened at 4, closed at 10. Easy peasy. But once we move into a place like this where the stakes are higher, as they tell you in the climbing wall industry, bankers and lawyers learn to love them. Yeah.
So so let's talk about when you came back from the Himalayas and the guy gave you his share of that original gym. What were some of the surprises that were like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What were some of those moments for you?
Well, it first was procuring insurance to get back up and running again, and being the business being what it is, you can't go very far without that. And so we dabbled around trying to get that up and running, and then once we were up and running, because we loved it, it was we were there every night, and we started to grow that community. And it was only about 3.5 years later when we lost our lease there. And so we were kind of running in volunteer help, not well. I don't think we did a great job of anything, but the climbing kind of spoke for itself, so it would draw people from all around. And we were the only game in upstate New York. There was no Albany gyms, there was no Clifton Park gym, we were the only thing between New York City and Montreal. So people would stop here. It was a destination. If it started raining in the Adirondacks, you had a place to go inside climbing if you were up there for a few days.
Got it. Got it. And then when you moved from there and built your own gym, literally, like you said, screwing the fastening
Yeah, the
everything by hand.
the plywood to the structure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what were some of the big challenges there for you?
It was growing the business, having it be a hobby or part-time. We just didn't have the time to put into it to grow it like it should. It did take on a life of its own, and it grew very gradually but conclusively, and it led us to the point where, right about the point where I retired from teaching, I said, we were overcrowded, and I said, well, what about doing this? And my wife, who also retired at the same time, said, we should be traveling in Italy, and we should be going here, and we should be doing this. And I said, okay. So we continued to do that and continued to run it as a side hustle, as you said. And then in the mid-2015, we said we got to do something, either end it or go big or stay at home.
Yes.
And wife was unconvinced that was a good path. She says, you got a good thing, just leave it. But I wanted bigger, better.
Yeah. And here you are.
Yeah.
So it seems like one of the key elements of this business is building the community of sort of your customers, right? You're sort of building this community of customers. So what are some of the things you do to accomplish that?
Well, our climbing team and our birthday parties are huge because a lot of people don't know who or what we are, despite everything we do on social media, despite the other, we tried some of the other avenues of advertising, which, not so good. But word of mouth seems, and the mom network is huge. And so, a birthday party here is, 10 or 12 prospective members coming in here. And, one or two aren't going to like anything, and then one or two are going to say, oh, man, I want to join the climbing team or whatever. And then, the local climbers in the area, we know most of them in the word of mouth. And, we have guys coming down from Lake Placid now who, right now it's too warm to ice climb, so they were in here this weekend in force. And, they come up from Albany because they get tired of climbing in the gym down there, so they're looking for something new.
Right. Now, a period of time I worked in the bicycle business, and there was a person I worked with, and she was really, really good at sort of building community around this brand, and she would do that with sort of events, where we would sponsor an event, typically at some race or something, we'd have a dinner or whatever. And do you guys do things like that as well? I mean, I'm thinking of, are there things besides the sort of parties that you do, et cetera, and the team, or is that basically the main focus?
That's our main focus. I mean, we do have an adult climbing league, which is kind of like a golf league or a bowling league. It's handicapped so that, intermediate and beginning climbers can still compete with the big boys because we score the climbs and we do raffles and we give stuff away, and then we sit around and have a campfire and drink beer out by the campfire afterwards. So that's part of our community too. Yeah.
So you're building this social element into it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Which helps to build that community, because I think in a lot of businesses, this sort of notion of building a community around it, sort of a grassroots group of folks who then help you propagate it, is really important, particularly if it's something that is not on the tip of everyone's mouth.
Right.
It's like, well, what is that? People, you say, well, I went to RockSport, and they're like, well, what is that? Is that like a museum?
Well, we're hoping that that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
We'd like to think that we're out there, and that social media is so important these days, and we've kind of left the print media and the radio spots behind, just because they just don't seem to draw the. Yeah. And it's hard to measure that, what they bring in too, as well.
So how do you think about hiring staff for a business like this?
We consider ourselves a teaching institution, and we have a very close relationship with SUNY and the adventure sports program at SUNY. Back in the old days, I used volunteers. That didn't work very well. Then I hired good climbers. That didn't work real well. And right about the time I retired from Queensbury, I became involved with SUNY Adirondacks Adventure Sports Program. And the more I got involved with it, the more I saw that I needed to know not only about the climbing process, but training people to train the climbing process. So I taught all of the climbing classes, so I would cherry pick what I thought were the best facilitators, not necessarily the best climbers, but the best facilitators, the people who had the best personality, people personality. And that was huge, because that's what made the business grow in RockSport 2.0. And now I'm doing the same thing. I'm just picking those best ones and saying, here's what we can do. We're part-time, so they trade climbing and minimum wage for being part of our staff.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up the notion of hiring around personality. I think of the 67 or 68 podcasts we've done and of the business folks we've talked to, I would say 80 to 90% of them say that exact same thing. I can train someone to do the job, but I can't train their personality. So I look for personality. I look for those interpersonal skills, their ability to communicate, etc. And if that fits, I'm confident that I can teach them the other part of the job. So that's a real important lesson, I think.
Yeah, and one that I didn't learn soon enough.
Yeah.
I wish I'd learned sooner, I think would be my...
Yeah, oftentimes people do exactly what you did, is let me go find the best climber. Let me go find the best nerdy engineer. Let me go find the best snowboarder. Well,
yes.
That may not be the best teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, with moms bringing little kids in here, there's certain personalities that attract them.
Sure.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that teacher needs to be both good with the 7-year-old and with the mom.
Yes.
Right?
Very
So that's
important.
a dynamic set of skills right there.
Yes. Wide range.
That's right. So what if you reflect, I'm sorry, and during this time that you've had these businesses, has anyone knocked on the door and said, hey, Tom, I'd like to buy this from you?
No. I'm hoping that's going to be the case here pretty soon.
Oh, okay.
As we get a little bit older, we're in our terminal glide of our climbing career. There's still some places I want to go to.
Yeah.
And this has been, for the last 2.5 years, it's been kind of an anchor. So I'm just starting I got a climbing trip to Morocco coming up in a month and a half, so I'm looking forward to that, and then who knows from there. Maybe go back to Yosemite and climb El Cap again or something.
Yeah, okay. So if you reflect back on so when was the first gym? What year was that?
1992.
1992. So if you reflect back on 30 years almost, what are some of the lessons that you've learned? What are some of the things, in addition to the personality thing we just talked about, hiring folks, what are some other things that you said, gosh, I wish I knew that when I was starting?
Boy, that's a tough question. I wish I'd had the foresight to take some business classes at SUNY. I had that opportunity, but things were unfolding way too fast, beyond my control, so that, if I'd had a little bit more savvy, I could have eliminated a lot of those mistakes as they went along.
Yeah. Did you ever think about bringing in a partner or hiring a consultant to help you with some of those things?
Well, when I first took it over in 92, I was with another guy, and that turned out to be a painful, horrible experience. And it killed our friendship, and it almost killed the business. And so I just finally, he lived out down the highway here a little ways, and it was hard for him to get up and, take care of his end of business. So I finally just said, why don't I just buy out? And,
yeah, partnerships are challenging. Yeah, That's why I'm always amazed, like when like a rock and roll band has been together for 30 or 40 years. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how do they do that?
I know.
Like the Rolling Stones.
Sixers. Yeah, I was just going to say.
Right? Those guys have been together as long as I've been alive, practically.
Yeah.
And somehow they do it. So they're pretty rare. The point is, partnerships are pretty rare. Successful ones, many of them blow up. Yeah.
Yeah, and ours did, and I lost a friendship as a result of that. I have investors now. As this project blossomed here, we were going to come up short on the financial end, so I brought in some investors, and I have my meeting Wednesday night with them, and that ought to be fun.
So you do have sort of financial partners in this.
Yes.
So it wasn't a bank that financed this.
There's quite a bit of bank involved,
okay.
But
in addition to the bank, there's
right.
individuals who
Yes.
participated in its
Yes.
financing.
And both of them had children who came through the system and saw how wonderful it is. One of our investors, their son made the U.S. climbing team last year.
Oh, wow.
And went to the world competition in, not the Ukraine, maybe it was.
And he started here.
And he started with a birthday party here. In fact, we still have his picture of that first birthday. I have a postcard. We had our party cards made of him climbing as a 12-year-old. Now he's a senior in high school, and he can climb everything in the gym up and down. He's
Wow.
uncommonly strong.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
So he's training right now for the spring. He won't make the Olympics, but he'll place well in the national.
I just had this conversation earlier this week with an individual who's been on the podcast, and this was a follow-on conversation, and they were looking for investors. And our conversation revolved around, sometimes your best investors are your customers. People who've had a great experience in your business, as a customer, and, they, for whatever reason, they really latch onto it.
Right. Right. I mean, this one guy stood in the doorway and he told one of my staff people, he said, "Hey, you look this place is way too crowded. Are you looking to expand? I'd be interested." And from there, we developed a relationship.
Yeah.
And then the other one with the son who competes, and they became our two investors.
Yeah, that's great. So what other lessons, what other things, I wish I would have known when I was 30 years younger?
It always costs 3 times as much and takes 4 times as long to accomplish what you need to do. I don't know about that one, Bella.
Yeah. That's some good advice, right? Higher personality, right?
In this business, I think that the personnel aspect of things, and the training has become so. It used to be you just hand the front door key to the person, and it's not like that anymore. The way things are in the climbing gym insurance industry.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about the business here. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have? Anything else you want to add to this conversation?
We're open 7 days. No.
Go. Give it the plug.
We're open like 362 days a year. So
yeah,
it's a life change. Come in and let us change your life.
Yeah. Well, and I can. My son, who worked for you
Yes.
back in the older gym, got me roped into this, and
literally.
Literally, and it has turned out. Now we've started here again. He finally has. Come up for air from having 2 little girls, and he brings one of them here to climb. And I will say, as a parent, it's been a great way for me to spend some time with my son. He climbs much better than I do, of course, but
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. That's the point, right?
It
doesn't matter. It does have that family social element, because there's not a lot of things that you can do with your kids, right? They're few and far between. And this has turned out to be a nice one for that.
There's something about tying into the end of the rope with another person and knowing that your life is going to be in their hands and vice versa for the next 10 minutes or so.
Right.
And whether you're indoors or outdoors, there's something about that connection that transcends the actual
Absolutely.
Process of tying in. It's one of the things that drew me to the sport right from the first day that I tied into the end of the rope in 1972. God,
Yeah. And my other son was out from Rhode Island, and him and his wife were here, and we climbed. And here again, it was actually both my sons were here. All of us were here that day, and it was this great sort of family activity, which oftentimes when you think about rock climbing, you don't think of that. You think of this
hanging off the side
of a cliff by yourself. You know, and I think that's one of the nice things about the gym is that it gives you that ability to do it on a rainy Saturday or a rainy afternoon. So great. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Tom, for everything. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this. It's a really fascinating and interesting journey you've had.
Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to climbing with you on a regular basis now that you're one of our members as well.
And I'm retired.
Yeah, and retired with me, so good. Excellent.
Yep, thanks again, Tom.
All right.
Bela, this was a great interview. It was quite the cool history lesson on the evolution of indoor rock climbing. And again, another interesting story of somebody who turned a passion into a business. What were your takeaways from this interview?
So I think one of the interesting things here was how for Tom, this started out as a side hustle. Actually, let me take a further step back. He was climbing with some friends, and it was during this climbing expedition, outdoor climbing that is, and it was during that where someone said, "Hey, I have this business." Tom was familiar with it. Do you want it? I've had enough of it. And that's sort of what got Tom into it. But he's really, really passionate. I mean, his passion is climbing, predominantly outdoor climbing. He's climbed all over the world. And here was an opportunity for him to sort of start this as what we call today a side hustle. And it started out as a side hustle. He was a full-time teacher, a high school teacher, and he was doing this, sort of nights and weekends. And it kept growing and steadily growing sort of organically, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there was a point a number of years ago where he retired from full-time teaching and made this kind of his full-time retirement gig. And he's been very successful at it. And this is also an example of where he was sort of in the right place at the right time because he's sort of riding the indoor climbing wave. And, that's wonderful if you're in business and to be able to take advantage of that. And so I think he's done a really good job at that. And it's another great example of, like many of the entrepreneurs we've interviewed in this unconventional path, where they take their passion and they figure out a way to turn it into part of their livelihood. And I think Tom's a great example of that.
And a guy that had no business training, and by his own admission, right, that it really cost him made some mistakes, right? But I loved how, he didn't create the improved perception among people that rock climbing was safe and socially acceptable, right? He was in on it when it was edgy, right? But I like how he adapted his business to the new market, and he was able to, instead of holding on to kind of this old model of, okay, this is edgy, right? That he was able to adapt to birthday parties and, right, people of all ages doing this. And I thought that was this really cool kind of way to evolve as the market evolved. And yeah, you might say, there was luck. But, for every person like Tom who adapted, I'm sure there was some people who didn't adapt and didn't respond to having the right instructors for little kids and dealing with the parents and all these things. So I think that was really a cool transition that he made, and he evolved with the market. And I think this is applicable to a lot of different businesses when you think about it, is where do you see the trends, right? Where, okay, right now there's some barriers, but we see that these barriers may erode over time. And like youth football is another great example right now, right? If I had kids, I wouldn't let my kids play youth football right now, knowing what we know about head injuries. But is there going to be a resurgence as technology gets better and they change the rules, right? And maybe that's not the greatest example, but I think there's lots of things where people say, this isn't safe, or this is too edgy for me. And kind of as people get accustomed to it, it becomes more mainstream. I mean, a lot of food has been like this, right? Molecular gastronomy, right? At first, people were like, no way, I don't want chemistry in my food, right? But now, sous vide cooking is part of the mainstream, and people buy little devices at home to make this stuff work. So maybe that's a better example. And when is the right time to get in as the trends change?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think with many businesses, when Tom first started this, or when indoor rock climbing first started, it was basically the geek. It was the rock climbing geeks, and those were the only folks that came through the door. And with many businesses, unfortunately, there's not enough of them to make a solid business out of it. So you got to figure out how to expand your market, how to expand your customer base, and sort of how to grow the community. And I think this notion of, birthday parties for kids, and as Tom said in his story, we have a birthday party with 15, 20 kids, and 2 or 3 of them we'll see, and they'll be coming back and keep coming back. So he's really growing his market organically. And I think that's a great lesson when we think about entering new markets. There are people who might be passionate about what you do, whether it be coffee or craft beer or whatever. Oftentimes, particularly when you're in sort of not greatly populated regions of the world, there's just not enough people who existingly want to get that, who exist today, who want to have that product or service. So you got to figure out how to grow it, and how do you introduce it? How do you build a community around it? How do you get people to want to keep coming back? And I think, as we all know, most businesses fail within the first 6 years. It's something like a very large percentage, 80 some odd percent, fail within the first 6 years. And Tom's been around for 20 plus. So it's a real statement to his ability to sort of help change and modify and grow the business as times changed, as his market has changed, and make it into a very viable and stable business.
And an important point, Bela, he didn't lose the hardcore market, right? He said, we had this hardcore, I forget where exactly they were from, and they still come. So, it's like you grow into these new customers, but if you can also maintain your legitimacy with your core customer group, that's remarkable, right? And that is a cool testament, I think, to the business that Tom's built. Now, I got another question for you, because this is kind of this transition from the side gig into a retirement income stream. And given uncertainty about Social Security and kind of this whole economic uncertainty that retirees are facing and living longer and all this stuff, I'm really interested now that you and I are kind of getting up in the age bracket here. So maybe some of our younger listeners won't be so interested, but it might be something for them to keep in mind downstream. But is entrepreneurship a valid way to kind of ease into retirement? Where, I can retire when I'm 65, and then I have this side gig that I turn into a business from 65 to 72, and then max out when I take my Social Security, right? Because I've done this cool thing and turned a passion into a business. So might there be this kind of niche of retirees that are too young to stop working and kind of fill this 7 years or whatever it is, right? Between when you can start taking Social Security and when you max out your benefits. I don't know. Any thoughts? Anything there that might say, this is the next big trend and you and I should write an article about this?
Well, Mike, I think it's a great observation. And I think back, I remember there was a period of time when I was in sort of my 40s, late 40s, where a bunch of my friends who were the same age were all buying rental properties. And that was going to be their sort of retirement income. Because, they were going to buy the rental properties and then use that rental income as it builds over the years to be their retirement nest egg. And I will tell you that every one of them I met said being in the rental business was awful. They hated it. And the only reason they were doing it was for this retirement income. So I think, the ability to take what you really like to do, your passion, and turn that into some sort of income stream, whether it be for retirement or not, I think is sort of a much more interesting path. And it was clear in my conversation with Tom that he has energy about this, he has passion about it, and he's really into it. And I never got that feeling from any of my the friends that I had who got into
were
the rental
landlords.
property. Right, that were landlords.
It's a tough business. Like a lot of friends that are landlords, and it's a tough business. And it's not the way you want to spend your retirement. But yeah, if you can pick something that you're passionate about, that you enjoy everything about, and do that on like a 7-year kind of, that's your time horizon. I love this idea.
Yeah, and I think that, given what's going on in the world today and your ability to do things and start things, and how segmented the market has gotten, right? There are little niches all over the place. And your opportunity to find one of those niches, and sort of elbow your way into it and start something, I think today it's unprecedented. I don't think the time has ever been better to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, and out of the 70 or some odd people we've interviewed so far, I think at least half of them fit that category, right? Where they've taken this really small kind of cool niche and grow it. And I think that if you're in kind of the second half of your career, this is a cool path to think about. And if you're 22 and listening, it's like, okay, let me keep my options open and let me think about this, because this is a nice way to kind of plan forward and to build your network and to develop ideas with this eye on, okay, maybe I want the security and the certainty of a more traditional job, more traditional career. But if I have these interests, and I'm somebody who's listening to our podcast, right, that has some interest in being innovative or being entrepreneurial, this is kind of a neat way to express that.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I thought was really interesting in his business model is this notion of, I think he said, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think he said all his employees are part-time employees. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, he pays them, but there's also sort of an exchange for sort of free climbing and the ability to use the facility. And
bartering.
Yeah, there's sort of this bartering process. And that's part of the compensation package, right? And I think it's working for him really well. And so do you think something like that is valuable in sort of other industries as well, Mike?
Yeah, we live in uncertain times, and this whole gig economy and this whole idea of being a contractor and being a digital nomad and all these interesting trends that I've been talking with people about and seeing is interesting. It's an interesting model, and I think that it can be very disenfranchising and very disempowering to not be connected to your workplace and be kind of this flexible part-time worker. But my real hunch is that for some of these people that want to augment their income, yeah, you can drive for Uber or Lyft, or yeah, you can deliver to DoorDash, whatever. But if you can do something like work for a person like Tom, who, yeah, maybe it's only a minimum wage, but you get to hang around with other people that share your passion. You get in exchange, some barter, some free services or goods that has value to you. And this might be a way to kind of counter some of these issues of engagement and attachment and identity that I think some of these people who are working in the gig economy get. It doesn't solve issues of health insurance and benefits and retirement and things that are sticky issues, but it's kind of a neat middle ground when you think about some of the problems that the gig economy is uncovering. And this is maybe a neat way, I think, to move forward. It's a bartering. It's an old idea. And it's been around for a long time. I mean, I remember when I was in college and I was working as an apprentice meat cutter. I was making minimum wage, but I was getting the marked down discount on steaks that were about to expire. And it wasn't that I was getting anything necessarily for free, but I was getting a really good deal because we had first dibs on these things. So I was eating really well. And as a college student, that's kind of important that, my classmates are all eating from the cafeteria and I'm grilling 2-inch porterhouse steaks, right? I was a popular guy. I won't mention the beer that went with that because that was a whole different story for another time. But this idea of a barter economy to augment a minimum wage type of a gig work, I think is a really cool thing to think about for both business owners and people that are looking for jobs, because there are some rules obviously here that things you can and can't do, but it's worth asking and it's worth having a conversation with people, finding a dedicated workforce and giving them something of value to make these kind of contingent relationships work. I think is a cool idea.
Yeah.
Or am I out of my mind?
No. I think that's a great observation, Mike, and I think there's a good lesson there for folks. And like you mentioned, there are some rules and regulations about all that kind of stuff, and you got to stay within the foul lines of that, within the boundaries. But I think it's a great thing to investigate and look at if it's appropriate for your endeavor or not. The other thing I thought was really interesting is sort of how his hiring selection process changed. He said in the beginning when he was hiring folks, he was hiring the best climbers who could also, really climb in his facility. But now he came to the realization that maybe as his market changed and as he was having more birthday parties for kids, people's personalities, people's ability to interact with customers, customer service, etc., becomes a much more important vector in the hiring equation than it was in the past. And we've seen this in other industries as well. And I think Tom said something like, you can sort of teach somebody how to climb and the rudimentary stuff about climbing, but their personality is much harder for you to teach them how to improve that. What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, I go beyond. Personality obviously is an important psychological contract, and there's been lots of research on it. But I like to even push farther and to get business owners and people who are doing hiring to really think about the knowledge and the skills that are components of that. Because things like teaching skills, well, that's good listening. That's the ability to explain complicated things simply. That's being able to give constructive and positive feedback. That's able to problem solve. So there's actually some specific things that could go beyond having a nice and cheery personality, or they're punctual, or they're open-minded, right? That I think you can even do yourself a favor and start to be even more specific. So I agree with the general truth that there's a broader set of skills other than technical skills that are important, but the more employers or entrepreneurs can identify what those are, and during an interview ask for a sample, or do a work sample, or to ask people to solve applied problems that demonstrate these skills. Now you can really start to make your HR system hum, even if you're a small business, right? So you've got a specific set of very descriptive skills and abilities that people have. You give people a reasonable chance to show that they have these skills, both through their resume and during the interview process, and you have a way to compare candidates on this so that you can choose the candidate that, beyond just saying they have a good personality, but okay, this person listened most carefully during the problem-solving set, they explained this behavior better, they provided better feedback in the video that I showed them during the interview, they dealt with the video of the angry parent, they were able to diffuse tension better and to offer better customer service. I think that I totally agree that hiring for this idea of personality is important, but I think it's more than personality. And I think there's actually discrete knowledge and skills that you can recruit for, right? Put it in the job ad, right? Select for it, and you can then evaluate your candidates in a more direct way using this more refined set of terms. So this could be a whole other podcast we could talk about, but I have really strong and positive, in a positive way, but really strong feelings about how to hire the best people, especially when you're a startup. And I've learned a lot of this the hard way too. So in the startups that I've been involved in. Yeah.
Excellent points, Mike. You articulated that very well. And I think the opportunity to make this into a process for any business by identifying the key parameters and characteristics that you're looking for, and then make that part of the selection process is a real good piece of advice.
Cool. Well, what do you think? Should we wrap it up?
I think so.
Let's
do that.
So, all right. Well, listeners, we're happy that you joined us in our podcasting adventure for this week. We hope you found the last hour or so interesting and thought-provoking. At this point, we'd like to once again thank Phillips Lytle for sponsoring our podcast. Bela, you and I both know that the attorneys at Phillips Lytle think like entrepreneurs. They take a pragmatic approach to getting things done, and they spot issues before they become problems. So we're both really comfortable telling listeners that if you need good, solid advice starting, funding, or selling a business, whether you're a single-person startup or working on a nine-figure exit, we confidently recommend the attorneys at Phillips Lytle. Bela, what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with them?
For more information, contact Rich Honan, who is a Phillips Lytle partner, either at 518-618-1225, or you can reach Rich directly via email from his firm's website at phillipslytle.com. That's PHILLIPSLYTLE.com.
Great. Thanks, Bela. And thanks to listeners for joining us this week. If you have any questions about what we've discussed today, if you have suggestions about topics or potential guests, please do feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
So we've had a lot of great guests in the pipeline, so I hope you stay with us, and please do subscribe if you haven't already. Signing off from upstate New York. Hey, see you next week, Mike.
Sounds great, Bela. Thanks for this, and we'll talk to you next week. From over here in Münster, Germany, have a great week, everybody.